First of all, you guys all, I think everybody rose their hand. You know what FreePBX is. You use it. It's basically the de facto standard for asterisk. And we like to believe that it has a lot to do with asterisk being as popular as it is. Having something usable and having a GUI has done wonders for the adoption of asterisk. So we're biased. We think it's our fault that asterisk is such a superstar and this conference has all these people and everything else. There's been millions of downloads, hundreds of thousands of active installations. It's hard to count. We try to count in different ways, and it may be 250,000, it may be 600,000. It's just one of those things, especially that people install PBXs and then they don't touch them. They put them in closets. Their phone systems work. They don't want it to change, so they're not doing updates. They're not doing other things to kind of contact back home and let us know that there's a system out there. And as a result, we can do our best guess based on, lies, big lies and statistics, or however that goes, and trying to figure out what the reality is. We are entering our 8th year. 2 years ago I spoke here, and it was kind of fun because the day I spoke was, in fact, it was the 10th year anniversary of Asterisk and the 5th year anniversary to that day of FreePBX being released. So it's very mature. It's been through a lot of releases. But it sounds like everyone here is using it, so you know that. Just a word on some of the institutions, so to speak, behind FreePBX. I mean, the number one not listed here is we try really, really hard to listen to you, the community. So if you watch our blogs, if you've watched us sift through the tickets and the ticket systems when we come out with new releases, looking for the ideas and the requests that people want, it's very much driven from that. There is sponsorship. The sponsorship makes FreePBX stable. It makes it very, the confidence if you're out there reselling it, you're running a business on it, that it's going to be around, it's got some level of financial backing, et cetera. Bandwidth.com owns the domain. They pay me. They let me run the project as I've always run it before I was affiliated with them. So, if a lot of people don't even know that or don't even have any idea when Bandwidth came into play, because they have not done anything to derail, change course, or affect the project, and that's all goodness for all of you. It means we're still running it based on what you want. Schmoozcom is and has been the biggest, call it corporate developer that's been involved with the project, probably extremely active since at least FreePBX 2.5. They typically have 2 to 3 developers who are currently working on it. So M. Brevda, if you've seen him, he's been doing a lot lately. If you follow our forums or whatnot, quite a bit. Brian, GameGamer43, he's on there. Tony Lewis, he's been mostly doing things around the distro. He's probably also the best tester known to mankind. It's amazing the things he can find. Anyway, so they're extremely active, extremely generous. They also, they are the force behind the FreePBX distro. I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the presentation. They also run most of the paid support services. The other sponsor is an Open Telephony Training Seminar that we run. It's the only official training. I'm sure around the world there's people giving trainings on FreePBX. We use that as a conduit. It tends to be mostly resellers, integrators, sometimes bigger company end users who come there, and it's a great way to also funnel in and shape what we should be doing with FreePBX. Every time we hold a course and it's extremely lab interactive, we learn so much more about what we should do, change courses in the project, things we should add, change how we do it, et cetera. So it's a great interactive way to kind of get that direct feedback. And we have one coming up, I'll tell you at the end, in January. So what have we been up to in the past year? This is where I'll kind of fly through it. Bottom line, tons of new features. I'll touch on both 2.9 and 2.10 in a second. Some big architecture changes, particularly in 2.9, which I'll go over. I want to talk about, after we go over that, what should we be doing in 2.11? Or more importantly than what should we be doing, should we be trendy and call it 11.0 to follow this recent trend, apparently, and really get confused, or 10.0 and really kind of confuse it with asterisks and overlap the versioning. And I'll talk a bit about the FreePBX distro and the focuses around it. So the thing I want to focus on, who has even seen a screenshot of 2.10? Not many. Something we did, and we actually did it in 2.9, and then we exposed it in 2.10, is we made the CSS and the logos and what we call views from a programming perspective in the MVC controller type model, basically changeable inside of FreePBX. And what that translates to, especially if you're reselling or system integrating or whatever, is you can change the look and feel. Now, it doesn't come in an extremely easy to use, fill out this form and it's all changed. And at some future point in time that may be coming. But it's all doable, right? If you have development resources or want to engage development resources, so that if you want your logo or you don't like it to say FreePBX because you're not able to sell around that, which is a whole nother story, then that can be done. And just by view of example, this is how FreePBX has looked since 2.3. So this is probably what all of you guys are used to, this look. You can't easily change it. You can't easily change the CSS. If you try to do it and then you update online, all of a sudden everything breaks because it's hard-coded and we load the new CSS files. And we decided it's getting dated. Plus, we also wanted to take an approach of saying, that's a lot of screen real estate on the left side there that gets taken up, right? And if we could get rid of that screen real estate, we could, in the future, do more things like CDR reports. We have more horizontal space to work with. So basically, with the view change, and this is what 2.10 looks like. I just picked one random screen. And I kind of picked this because you can see, of course, right now there's like all this white space, right, in between our menu on the right and what's going on the screen. What we've done is we've moved all the menus up on top. So as you hover over there, it's pull-down screens. Probably the biggest controversy we've run into, and it's not a done deal, although no one's talking about it on the forums to help give us some ideas, is twofold. What are the right category headings on the top, okay? And what should go under those category headings, basically. Since you don't see it unless you hover over it, people start to kind of say, this doesn't make sense to me, I'm used to this, I want this here, I want that there. The other thing, by the way, and I realize I spaced it, is that language on the top right. I want to get rid of that. That's valuable real estate, and I'm going to see before it goes final if I can move that somewhere else. You switch your localization language, you don't have to have it up there all the time. It's just kind of a relic. So one thing that we have done, if you want to play with it, it's actually been in FreePBX even in 2.9, is there is a configuration file. It's an INI format, okay, plus an advanced settings switch. And if you switch the switch and you have that configuration file present, you can now take any of the applications, create your own headings, basically, and put them anywhere you want, as well as change the sort order, etc. So you can make as many or as few tabs on the top there as you want by making that change. What we're hoping is that a handful of opinionated people would say, I like this idea better, and they'd use that configuration file and post it up in the forums and help us get some ideas. Because again, like we say, this is a community thing. We don't want to dictate what makes sense. And when we are infighting on the development team, we can't decide what makes sense. So eventually there'll probably be a GUI that lets you just move things around and define your own. The other thing, if you do the menu, is there's a favorites, and by default it'll be on the far left. So if you want to put things in favorites, you can do that for the things you access all the time. So bottom line, this change, it's purely based on CSS and views. So if you want it to be sophisticated, if you just wanted new colors, you could go and you can override the CSS, and there's abilities and advanced settings to do that. If you want it to get sophisticated, you could create your own views and change it in a completely different way. It takes a bit of programming, and the documentation is probably a little lacking, but it's all doable. I mean, this is all based on, this could all be done with a module that you insert in FreePBX, and it could change everything. So real small sample of changes, very small, right? Big thing we did, if you haven't hit 2.9 yet, I'm sure most people who have spent any time with FreePBX know that there's this amportal.conf file, okay, and it had all these cryptic settings, and it wasn't even clear. It was very error-prone because it's a configuration file. It was hard to find out what all these magic settings are that us developers have hid all over the code, of which in 2.9 there were over 200. There's probably over 300 now. We moved it into an advanced settings GUI. So that means it's now in the database. It's in a GUI. It means we can auto-detect things, and actually sometimes the application will change settings for you. Like it'll detect that you've got some annoying sonic wall content filter on your firewall, which is keeping module updates from happening or making it sit there for 30 seconds before it updates. It'll say, well, that's not right, and it'll switch it into a new mode to overcome that sort of thing. Okay? So that's all there. All the settings are exposed. That means there's documentation. The tooltips tell you what all the settings are. There's a lot of cryptic settings, but there's a lot of useful ones as well. And it's allowed us to do things like in extensions. Forever people have said, can I change the default when I change an extension? Or I want to see all the details when I create a new extension. Or I don't want the default for NAT to be yes or no or whatever. A lot of that stuff you can change now by just setting it up. And that's just one of many examples of things you can set up in advanced settings. So from an administrator standpoint, a lot of great stuff there. This bootstrap ability, that's really, it's some improvements in the framework, and it doesn't really mean anything to you as an end user. But if you're the type who's writing tools or writing CLI tools that you want to access the FreePBX environment, it makes it really simple, where it used to be a real nightmare to put about 2 lines of code in, and you've got access to every function from every module and every API to do whatever you need to do. So that was a big rearrangement of stuff in 2.9. We introduced an endpoint manager, which is an ongoing thing, hoping that community support or community input would really help improve it. It's not very intuitive. The GUI is hard to use, and so far, unfortunately, I haven't seen kind of the feedback from the community say, hey, here's some good ideas. And that's actually what I'm hoping for in the main developer, Andy Nagy, who basically develops the endpoint manager, is kind of hoping for maybe some help there. So never, ever be shy about saying, I've got some great ideas, and can I share it with you, and contact one of us one way or the other. I say dozens, it's really hundreds of new features. 2.9, which actually was about a year in the making, it was one of the longer releases. I think it was like 612 closed tickets against it, of which a lot of those are feature requests. Dozens and dozens and dozens of features, big and small. Going over it, we could spend a day probably, if not more. 2.10 has not been as big of a release. Because 2.9 had so many changes, we didn't want to just hop on 2.10 and all of a sudden, change everything again, because stability is very important for us, and we really have an eye on that. So even though 2.10 looks like a bigger change, because that's where we exposed the new GUI abilities, in fact, all of the new GUI abilities, with maybe a few minor changes, were introduced in 2.9. And they've been being used other places. SchmoozeCom who takes FreePBX, wraps up, does a lot of their own stuff. They've actually been using a different view of the GUI for quite some time on their proprietary project, which is, you could call it FreePBX on steroids, kind of what they put there. So call recordings was one big thing on 2.10 that has always been a problem. You got call recordings, call always, call on demand, or call inbound, outbound. It's never worked right. It's been ambiguous what it means. It's been confusing. So I made an attempt, and I'm sure there's bugs in there once this really gets under the microscope, to completely redo call recording so that now you can say inbound versus outbound, internal PBX versus external, extension to extension. A lot of people don't want to record. You can actually have priorities as to who wins if there's a conflict. That comes more into extension to extension calling, right? May be that the boss wants to record everyone's call and he doesn't want anyone to record his. So you need to have a way to deal with those. So that's all been revamped. On-demand recording, we've tried to tie it into that. For those of you familiar with Asterisk in the past, on-demand recording was nothing more than auto mixmon, okay, or mixmon before auto mixmon. We've put our own application in there so it ties into all of our controls. So if an extension says it can't do any call recording, including on-demand, then it won't, right? And it won't be in conflict with auto mixmon, which would let you do it otherwise. So we've done a lot with call recording that we've tried to handle there. And just have to go play with it and see what. And I think I've added it to ring groups, other places like that. Backup module rewrite. Schmooze took it upon themselves to completely rewrite the backup module. Backup module hasn't been bad. It's had limitations. It's had a few bugs that have never been tracked down they seem to resurface. They've completely rewritten it. It's template driven. It'll do offline backup through FTP and SSH, which you could kind of kludgely do before, but now it's all in the GUI. It's all right there. It's got an HA component to it that was introduced earlier and has been carried forward. When I say template driven, it means you can start backing up all sorts of other things beyond what's in FreePBX. So a lot of you guys put your own stuff, or maybe it's one of Ward, NerdViddel's projects in some extra files or whatever. You can add all of that, and not only can you back it up, but you can restore it based on the template as well. In the past, we had ways where you could back up a few extra things, but you couldn't restore them through the GUI. You would have to go into the tarballs and know enough to dissect it. So I mentioned the GUI layout. CDR reports, we've dumped the old CDR report engine. It was very old. It wasn't being supported. It had outdated PHP libraries it depended on. We've put a new one in. It's a lot faster. It's probably better in some areas. It's probably, it might miss some things in other areas, but it needed to happen. Same with the operator panel. Who here uses FOP on FreePBX? Okay, not too many. So Flash operator panel, it's really, the version 1 really isn't being supported by Nicholas anymore. He's got FOP2. FOP1 has problems on 1.8. It kind of works. Other areas it doesn't work. And we've just gotten to a point where we're not able to support it, right? We've had it in FreePBX, but it was never ours. We kind of hosted it. Okay, so we've put support in for multiple operator panel options. In beta 2, I've just finished moving FOP into its own self-sustained, unsupported module. So if someone in the community wants to try to take it over, right? It used to be kind of ingrained within the rest of the FreePBX framework, and now it really is a fully contained module that you can remove. There is a module, but it requires an RPM for FOP2. We do have that RPM on the FreePBX distro. There's also from iSymphony, from i9, the iSymphony Conductor. It's a commercial, probably the best operator panel application out there. They do have a free, I forgot what it is, one or few user license with a few limitations that you can load up. And then they have, they go up to enterprise grade scalability. It's a very good solution. If you'd like to see it, we do have it on a system in the booth on the show floor if you're interested. Bottom line, we're looking for other alternatives and not limited to just one as well. Because operator panel is important, it always has been, and it will continue to be. And you know, we're trying to find ways to deal with that. So real quick, what are we thinking about the next release? Probably some of the bigger things on our mind. It didn't happen this release, is the ARI replacement. We're kind of hoping to do that in 2.10. I hope it happens in 2.11. ARI user portal, that's where a phone user, not an admin, right, goes to check their voicemail or set features on their system or, you know, et cetera. That's kind of been lingering on as well. That's another application. We've basically adopted it. I mean, the original person who wrote that, he's been gone for years, and it's really been our team that's been working on it. It's not bad, but the general feeling is no one wants to invest into doing more as opposed to just rewriting it. Plus, if we rewrite it, we have ambitions to rewrite it in such a way that it was layered and that it could become foundation libraries for things like XML applications that could use the same core classes and potentially, you know, phone-based, you know, Droid applications at some point or whatever. So kind of some good ambitions there. Internal plumbing stuff, PeerDB is what we use inside of FreePBX to access the database, and that hasn't been supported for a few years, and it's starting to cause problems. The native AskDB SQLite support that I believe 10.0 asterisk has gotten is something that we're real interested in doing. It doesn't really mean anything for you as an end user, but there's a lot of benefits from the programming perspective. Right now, every time the FreePBX application needs to touch anything inside the internal database and asterisks, we need to go in through the manager. And it's kind of dumb, really. Anyway, and a lot of other ideas. And we'll be hitting you through the feature requests, through blogs, to kind of find out, you know, what should we be working on in the 2.11 time frame. Okay, so the distro, okay? I think a small handful of you raised your hands and said you're using the FreePBX distro, right? The rest of you can get up and leave now. No, it's, so just a word about the distro, first of all. You know, we've had the distro out now since earlier this year. It's been an ongoing discussion for several years, since about 2.4, I think, or 3 maybe it was, I don't know. And we finally decided to do a distro for a few reasons. One of the reasons is we just got tired of saying no. Okay, I mean, it was just a regular thing. Why don't you guys do a distro? We don't like this and this distro. We don't like that and that distro. We want a good, clean-cut, professional distro, et cetera. Okay, so we finally said, okay, you know, really what it was is Schmooze stepped up to the plate and said, we'll do the distro for the project, so we'll project manage and run it, right, and do the distro. And there was really what there was a lacking of was a clean, security-based, you know, when I say clean, I mean, you know, streamlined, not a lot of extra stuff thrown on, not all sorts of, you know, project du jour, not all sorts of things that, you know, affect stability. Those are all fine, and you know, there's different distros, and they all have their pluses, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. You know, one of the big things that we attacked, and that was happening on the distro, was really focusing on security. And a couple of examples, the obvious one is passwords. Every distro out there, when we came out with this, and probably still now, maybe some of them have learned from us, they used all the default passwords. And what happened is there were bots, or there were viruses that were out there attacking FreePBX systems with known backdoors with default passwords, because no one knew to go and change those passwords. And those were some of your biggest vulnerabilities. So when you load the FreePBX distro, the very first thing it does, first of all, when you load the ISO, it generates some random passwords, like your database passwords and whatnot. Those are random. okay? And they're locked to local root, right? Like most, I think most distros do, but they're random. It's not a default one. So if someone does get to your system, it's not the same password as is out there. When you go to the distro, if it sees it's the first time, this is more or less the screen that comes up. I guess the FOP has now been taken off now that we've removed it. And you've got to put in passwords. Now, we're not doing anything to slap your hand and say that's a good or bad password, because it becomes a religious debate as to what a safe password is. But it keeps you from having the same password out there, and it gives you the opportunity to try to put something that at least isn't the same as the bots are out there trying to attack. Okay? The other thing that we've done on security, a real common thing that we've seen on distros like Trixbox, I think Elastic's might do it, I don't think PBX and a Flash does it, is they have a lot of, who here knows what a sudo file is? Raise your hand. Fair number, okay? In a nutshell, it's a way that you can change to root to do certain commands. Like you got to set the network settings, and you want to make a GUI to set the network settings, and the GUI in Apache isn't running as root, but only root is allowed to set your network settings, right? So you have a sudo command that says this command can be run by the asterisk user or the Apache user, which happens to be asterisk, okay? Well, I've seen, I know in Trixbox, maybe in Apache, where they've sudoed bash, okay, to run as root. To tell you what that means, for those who don't know, that means that basically, if you can have any sort of vulnerability in Apache, you can become root. You may as well run Apache as root. What's the point of actually being in denial? That's what it means. And you never run Apache as root, just like you don't run asterisk as root. It's just a really bad thing. It's a great, and you know, there have been hacks. So one thing we've done, there's no sudo file on our distro. Okay, we have a coupling, and I won't go into details. You can talk to us at the booth if you're interested. But the bottom line is, where we need to do things from the GUI, it's not done through sudo. It's done through some other mechanisms so that there's no possibility at that level to have a vulnerability break, which all of a sudden things we didn't expect. Right? So you could have a vulnerability break in any of those things that we automatically do, like changing the network IP address or something. It's conceivable. I'm not saying that we're perfect. There's clearly still vulnerabilities in FreePBX and probably Apache and other places that we're always very responsive to, but we're doing what we can to focus on security type things there. Other reasons we did the distro, it allows us as a FreePBX team to do deeper engineering integration at the Linux level. Just one example is a sysadmin module. We have a sysadmin module, okay, in FreePBX. It lets you do things, everything from your intrusion detection, which is fail to ban, so that you can do basic settings in the GUI for fail to ban. Okay, another example of something that would normally need root, right, that we do with this coupling, to network addresses and other things. So more system level integration that we can do at that level. It lets us be more careful about asterisk versions. All too often I see distros, new asterisk version comes out, they adopt it. Right? Okay, we're trying to be progressive, but we're trying to do some level of testing and some due diligence. It doesn't mean we won't come out with an asterisk version and find out it has a bug. We've done that, and that's where this comes in. Okay, we will patch asterisk. Okay, we're very careful about it. We really want to be as much on stock asterisk as possible. We are not trying to fork asterisk. Okay, and any patches that we are currently or have done in the past are always sitting back in the asterisk bug tracker, right? I think there's 3 that were in the distro, which are now finally in 1.8.7 or some previous ones, so we don't have to carry those forward. I know there's at least 1 patch, which will never be in 1.8 because asterisk said we won't put it in 1.8. They've put it in 1.10, so we won't have to carry it forward, right? But the bottom line is, the asterisk priorities aren't always our priorities. We go based on different things. So you know, I'll assure you that we're not going wild patching asterisks, and we're very careful about it. But you know, we want to do the right thing by you and by the needs of FreePBX. Let's see. And, oh, shoot. OK, so real quick, if you come by our booth, the business card and the fishbowl, right, you can ask more questions there. We're giving away a $6,200 worth of a FreePBX appliance. It's a great little appliance. It's at the booth. You can see it. And you have to be there on Thursday because we're not shipping it. We're too lazy. Okay, so you got to be there for the drawing. If you're not there, we'll keep drawing cards until someone is there, and you'll take home a really cool, nice little appliance, little laser engraved faceplate with FreePBX on it, et cetera. OK, so commercial break and then Q&A. We have our next seminar coming up in January. So anyone who lives in the type of weather we have outside, Naples, Florida, it's supposed to be beautiful at that time of year. There is currently early bird pricing available. You can get more information on the FreePBX website. And if you've been to one of our trainings, we've continually revamped it, and we are doing some big changes this time to make it almost all completely lab-driven, because every time we add more labs, and the feedback is, that's great, now add more. So, and there's already a lot of it in there. It'll be almost all lab-driven. Questions?